My name is Wojciech Przybylski. I'm editor-in-chief of Visegrad Insight. And this meeting takes place in the context of a report we launched together with the German Marshall Fund on Eastern Partnership Scenarios 2030, Eastern Partnership Futures. You can see in the back a cover of that report. If needed, we can send you a link. But more importantly, we want to focus today, of course, on the prospects of Belarus, a country so much eventful in recent days. Today, we have with us Ambassador Leslie Scanlon, Canadian ambassador to Poland, and in her capacity also covering Belarus. Professor David Marples, a distinguished professor of Alberta University, focusing on Central Eastern Europe and Russia. And as a first responder, Veronika Laputska, GMF, Rethink.CEE fellow. We'll have excellent participants, as I see, also commenting and giving comments and asking questions later on. But let me ask you now, Ms. Ambassador, to begin and to give us a bit of a context of why is it even important to discuss Belarus?
Well, I'm going to ask you to make me a sign if I talk too fast, because I tend to talk too fast. And I've just biked home in the pouring rain, so I'm all fluffy. I'm looking at myself going, oh. Anyway, it's a real privilege to be here with some real experts, not only who will be speaking, but also on the line. So, dzień dobry from Warsaw, or should I say witanie? It's a real pleasure to participate in today's event, obviously with Visegrad Insight, and of course the report that you referenced I found to be really good value that you produced in partnership with German Marshall Fund and a variety of other experts from the region. I'm not going to talk for very long because I'm not the really interesting person here today, but I did want to say that Belarus is a bit of a conundrum for me personally, given how complex the political situation is and the fact that we don't have in-country representation, and that makes it really hard to cover it. That said, my team, we try to be in Belarus at minimum every quarter. And while I've only been there twice since arriving in Warsaw in fall 2018, I'm in regular contact with good contacts on the ground. And of course, I've made a lot of connections when I have made my trips there. When I presented my credentials to President Lukashenka, he was very interested in talking about Canadian hockey. And in particular, my daughter, who plays high-level competitive hockey, and it was the ties that bind. Every time I speak to a Belarusian representative from the MFA, they want to know when we're coming to play hockey. But we have a very good team in Ottawa that works on Belarusian issues, and of course, the Belarusian mission in Canada has a very energetic charge and a very energetic team, in addition to the Belarusian MFA, who are also very active and engaged with Canada. And so we are really on all fronts trying to grow this relationship. As most of you will know, for about 10 years, we didn't have a relationship. Between 2006 and 2016. We had put Belarus on an area control list, which we removed them from after the last, two federal elections ago, so in 2015. And we therefore lifted trade sanctions that had been in place for a decade to start re-engaging diplomatically. Belarus, as you know better than I, my two colleagues, this is an important country in such a complex region where history and relationships are so important. We are grateful that Belarus has taken a leadership role in terms of the Minsk process and appreciate the constructive role they have played in this peace process between Russia and Ukraine. And you'll know, of course, how engaged Canada is in Ukraine, facilitating negotiations towards a ceasefire and peace agreement, though of course it is slow going. You'll also know that Belarusian authorities did not take official measures to stop the spread of coronavirus. However, many individuals took personal measures such as keeping their kids home from school, disinfecting, washing their hands, social distancing. And these same individual citizens in Belarus are, as we speak, peacefully expressing their views through their actions in this pre-presidential election period. So it's not just about the government, it's about the people, it's about the country, it's about the history, it's about the region. So I did want to say we're obviously following events closely, and the topics of today's discussion, the possibility of changes in leadership over the coming decade and energy, are issues, of course, that we follow closely at the Canadian Embassy. We're also, of course, interested to follow Belarus as they continue to expand and broaden relationships with the US, the EU, China. J'ai hâte d'entendre le professeur Marples ainsi que Madame Laputska, qui ont tous les deux une connaissance et compréhension profonde de Belarus, ainsi que la région plus large. Et je félicite Visegrad Insight pour avoir organisé cette activité si opportune et pertinente. Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you very much. And that's a really a good start, kickoff into the keynote. I would now ask Professor Marples to deliver on the question of what are possible scenarios indeed for Belarus in the context of very recent events, but in fact looking much more beyond in the next 5 to 10 years. What's in store for Belarus? David Marples, over to you.
And I'm particularly happy to be involved with the Canadian Embassy in Warsaw, which has been my refuge actually once or twice in the past few years, and even sponsored my book launch back in 2014. Today I'd like to do sort of a short-term analysis, what's happening in the short term, and then more for the longer term. And I think in 2020, we've seen an unusual level of public activity in Belarus, particularly compared with the previous election, 2015. But it's actually more comparable in some ways to the election of 2010. The significant difference between this one and 2010 is that the crackdown has occurred before the election takes place rather than after it. And that needs to be sort of explained why that would happen. We've seen the emergence of several candidates who pose serious problems as contenders to President Lukashenka, mainly because they're either from the establishment, that is people who were formerly in the administration, particularly Sepkala, who was, of course, the Belarusian ambassador to the United States at one stage, and then in charge of the high-tech park. And also Victor Babarika, who was in charge of a significant bank, and is probably the closest candidate who could be given the term oligarch, which was quite significant in the past with Ukraine, which also had an oligarch as its president until quite recently. He poses a threat. And in addition to that, you've got a figure from social media, Sikhanovsky, who may not be running himself, but nevertheless, through his wife and also through his social media outlets. He's of course imprisoned at the moment. We also, as the ambassador says, have the pandemic, and the significant part about the pandemic is that it's been dismissed by the president as a psychosis, something that's not really worth bothering with, something that it will be overcome. And he may have wanted to keep the economy running, particularly in view of the difficult situation of the Belarusian economy. But at the same time, I think it was very much resented by the people of Belarus that in this crisis, which everyone was facing, the president was not going to come to their aid. They had to stand up for themselves. And as the numbers have risen, that is more and more the case. Belarus is now on the sort of level as Sweden, where there was a deliberate policy not to intervene directly in the first stage of the pandemic. And I think this has also led further to the response in Belarus in the elections. I mean, the elections are timed for August the 6th, a time when, sorry, it's August the 9th, correct me if I'm wrong, August the 9th, when most people in Belarus would expect to be at the dacha or on holiday somewhere. People would not be paying attention to high politics. So it's high politics, it's in the middle of the summer, it's in the middle of a pandemic, and you've got a president who sort of more or less claimed to be the president for life and associated himself directly with the interests of the Belarusian state. In addition to that, you have a very complex series of relations with foreign powers, first and foremost, Russia. Russia has proven a difficult ally for Belarus over the past 5 to 10 years, and particularly over the last year and a half. Vladimir Putin is placing more and more demands on Belarus and on Lukashenko in particular, to join or have a more active role in the Russia-Belarus Union, for there to be a common currency, for this currency to be issued in Russia, for Russian airbase in Belarus, and in various respects, particularly through media and social media, is having a profound influence on the citizens of Belarus directly. And this is also integrated with the presidential campaign, in that some of the candidates clearly have business interests with Russia. Veronika, for example, until recently headed the Belgazprom Bank, which was directly related to the Russian Gazprom, the biggest company in Russia, and one that has been directly involved in the political climate in Russia as well. So this is a serious threat. I don't mean to dismiss Veronika as simply a Russian puppet or something like that, but the fact is there is a strong relationship between this candidate and the Russian Federation. I'll talk a little bit more about Russia when I talk about the long-term future. Added to that, the president himself seems to be losing popularity. I mean, I've watched Lukashenko for a very long time. I was present in Minsk when he got elected back in 1994, and that was a significant election campaign. And I would say for the most part, it was a free and fair election campaign. And thinking back at that time, he was a rank outsider in the same way that some of the candidates are in Belarus today. But it was a level playing field. In Belarus today, you don't have a level playing field because the president and his administration control all the mechanisms by which the election will take place. And the result in that respect is not really in doubt. You know, he's expected to deliver a victory, and this will be announced on August the 9th, and it will be welcomed by Russia, which will then put further pressure on Belarus. But nevertheless, Lukashenko cannot ignore the fall in ratings. It's been the case not only through the ratings of opposition networks and phone companies, but also official ones from the Institute of Sociology, which have shown a significant drop in his popular support to around the mid-20s, if not lower. And I think in Minsk in particular, he's always struggled to be a popular candidate. And I remember back in 2001, he was not running too well in Minsk at one stage as well. So the situation now, I think, is that Lukashenko has had a crackdown. He's changed the government. He's brought the so-called special forces, the Siloviki, into power in order to be in a position to retaliate should there be any mass demonstrations, public protests from now into early August. And we've seen the results already with 100 or so arrests. Two of the candidates for the election already in prison, awaiting prison sentences, which may be short, but then arrests may continue. So it's plain that the government has decided, as the Welsh like to say, to get your retaliation in first before the election takes place. This, I think, will ensure that on August the 9th, Lukashenko will win the election one way or another. It will not be recognized as free and fair by Western powers, because it won't be. And there will follow a significant period of perhaps sanctions, perhaps more advice from the European Union as to how Belarus should continue in the future. But in the long term, I don't think the European Union will abandon Belarus, because Belarus has made certain steps. There's a dialogue in place. There's an EU office in Minsk. The border is open. All these things, I think, have been healthy developments. And then you have the election period marred, really, by blatant violence and hardline policies and repression. But I think this change now is imminent in Belarus. Not today, not on August the 9th, but within the next 5, perhaps 10 years, but I would suggest the next 5 years. The president has run out of ideas. His main problem is the economy. The economy is really what keeps Belarus afloat, but it also keeps Lukashenko afloat. In the past, when he could get cheap loans, cheap supplies of oil and gas from Russia for resale, refine them, resell to Europe at high prices, the Belarusian economy was always okay. I mean, compared with Ukraine, for example, it was doing quite well. Compared with others in the neighborhood, it was always okay. That is no longer the case. Now the economy is sinking, it's It's forecast to drop about 7% in GDP this year. It could get worse in the future. And Lukashenko has just rejected an IMF loan. And clearly, this suggests that he will turn again to Russia, which he's starting to do, at least for the short term. The question is, can Belarus move ahead, retain independence, promote more democratic values without complete subjugation to the Russian Federation? And I think that is the immediate problem for the next 5 years. I don't necessarily think that Russia wants to invade. I don't think that's really in Russia's interest. It's not necessary in some ways because Russia already has so much social, economic, and political influence in Belarus. Nevertheless, that will be the hardest part. I don't think Russia would mind if Lukashenko wins the election. I don't think Russia has a chosen candidate. I think it would be quite okay if Veronika won, if Sakala won. I think that would be okay as well. But if Lukashenko won in a weakened condition, that would be for Russia the best solution, because this would keep Belarus more dependent in the days ahead. But in the long term, I'm actually more optimistic. You know, I've seen the young people on the streets, some defiance. I watched on video today, in fact, the school graduate who denounced the regime and talked about the future. And I think this is the future. I think there's a time when the people come out in the streets in this number, and you have forces on social media that cannot be controlled directly by the authorities, then this is a positive sign. I think the Belarusians have a highly educated young stratum. The unfortunate thing is, and we have Veronica sitting there who's about to follow me, many of them are outside Belarus. And I think one of the questions for the future is, would the generation that moved outside the borders of Belarus move back again if there was a possibility of complete change in government and the ruling structure? So I think I'll stop there, and I hope I've given enough comments for questions.
Well, there is definitely, you set the stage, and definitely for questions I've been noting down. But before we begin Q&A, indeed, let's have Veronika give us an account, perhaps also of some recent events and comments to your introductory remarks, after which we'll begin question and answer session, but that will follow soon. Veronika, over to you. You need to unmute. Please unmute.
Yes. Thank you very much, Wojciech, and thank you very much once again for just organizing this event, which I think is really high time to do in terms of what is happening in Belarus. I think it was needed. And it's a pleasure for me to be here with the ambassador, with the dear Professor Marples, and with this wonderful audience I can see joining our event. It wouldn't be a surprise if I say that most of the time I actually completely agree with David's view on what is happening in Belarus. I think that I can agree basically with most of the words Professor Marples has said. I would just add a few more angles so that maybe we can touch upon a few more other interesting topics in our discussion. First of all, I do agree that I don't think that major changes are going to happen now. I think there's going to be another term. But on the other hand, and it will be a positive side to this, I see a lot of things happening which haven't happened before. And they have to do with the emancipation of the society and with the development of, I think, social media and information technologies just in the world in general. So, and what I mean by that? Firstly, Belarusian authorities do realize that now when we have basically a blogger who is running behind his wife as a presidential candidate and who was able to mobilize so many people throughout the country, they do understand that this is another power which probably was a little bit unexpected for them to see. That is why, for instance, they already started to hack certain Telegram channels, certain channels which belong to these bloggers who are completely independent from the authority, from the state. They don't have state jobs, so they really have little of leverage in terms of leverage on such people. So I think this is what they're taking in consideration, and this is the lesson learned for them. Also, what they're doing, they are trying to minimize the intensivity of online and kind of technological engagement. For instance, together with the rest of presidential candidate Viktor Babaryka and his son, they blocked our crowdfunding platform Mola Mola, which was responsible for gathering the vast majority of funds to support our health sphere workers and doctors. And now this, a lot of hospitals now are facing troubles because of this, because this was part of the arrest of all accounts of Belgazprom because Mola Mola platform was using this Belgazprom technology. Secondly, I think that what is remarkable now is that bloggers are really, and people who have been always apolitical, musicians, I don't know, TV presenters, they started to come out and they started to speak the truth, what they think and what has been happening behind the scene. On state TV channels, we've had already a few really strong confessions of our TV presenters from state channels, who some of them still work there, but probably won't, of course, after this. Some of them don't work for the state television or radio anymore. But they were speaking the truth about the media sphere and how the propaganda is working, and they are calling for people to listen to them and for all media resources to start speaking the truth. So this is something which is remarkable and which hasn't happened before. And I think the third thing which shows a very drastic emancipation of Belarusian society is the engagement of women, this time during the elections and during just this year overall. Not only women are started to be running more actively in terms of collecting signatures to become candidates for presidency, so 4 of them were started, now there's going to be fewer of them, but also we have a lot of women who are becoming vocal online. And here again, I'm speaking about musicians, I don't know, women who are just Instagram bloggers speaking about parenting or lifestyle or food. So they're becoming very active and in terms of speaking the truth, and they're very emotional. And I think this aspect is also something which has an important novelty into this process. So I think this is something also which we should monitor, and this, to my mind, also gives a bit, actually not a bit, but quite a lot of optimism to what is happening in Belarus. And regarding the recent updates, we were just discussing this briefly, but I will share it with our wonderful audience, is that at the moment, around 40 people are waiting for trials. After they were detained last week after the demonstration, 34 already got fines, which vary from $50 to $400 per person, which they have to pay. And for Belarus, it's a lot of money because some people get $200 as their salary for a month. And also our head of Central Election Commission announced that at the moment 7 people submitted their signatures. So it's of course Lukashenka, Babaryka, Viktor Babaryka, who is imprisoned, Tsapkala, David mentioned all of them, who has been detained for a little bit but now is released, this former head of Park of High Technologies and ambassador to the US. Then it's Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, wife of the blogger who is imprisoned and probably will also face serious criminal charges. And then it's former member of parliament, Hanna Konopatskaya, Andrei Dmitriev from Tell the Truth movement, and Sergei Cherichin from the People's Assembly, People's Assembly Party. Also, our head of the CEC said that she doesn't think that this will be the final number of people whom they're going to register. So I think we already see that it's becoming fewer people in this race. And I believe that it's going to cause more protests in Belarus. After this, there will be some people who are not registered, especially those who we know and everybody knows gathered a lot of signatures like Babaryka, especially, and Tikhanovsky. So I would like to thank you one more time for this, and I'm happy to share the opinion with our dear audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Veronica. Thank you for a very timely account and details of what has been happening clearly over the last week and the weekend, including today. These are important events. Now we're beginning Q&A session. As I said, this is strictly off the record. I'm turning off the recording.